Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to have you join us this afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands from where I'm calling in from, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the East Kulin Nations. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge Wurundjeri Elder Auntie Joy Murphy, who is a patron of Children's Ground, the traditional owner. We would also like to know the lands from where you're watching this webinar, and if you would like to put that in the comments, we'd love to read it. My name is Megan Mundy. I work at Children's Ground based in Naarm, Melbourne, and I'm a former high school teacher and teacher coach. This webinar is hosted by Children's Ground, a First Nations organisation driving long-term change through First Nations culture and leadership, transforming education, health, wellbeing, employment, and community life. Children's Ground is breaking cycles of injustice and disadvantage with evidence, equity, and opportunity. Every year, as a part of National Reconciliation Week, Children's Ground asks schools and workplaces to wear it yellow to raise funds for Children's Ground. And in the lead up to National Reconciliation Week, which is an opportunity for non-First Nations people to learn about the true history of this land, we would love to take some time to explore different ways that teachers can practice truth-telling and bring First Nations perspectives into their classrooms. We have three wonderful educators here to share some of their experiences with you. And during the discussion, you can ask questions through the Q&A function or make comments in the chat. We will be asking some of your questions to the panel later in the session. But first, let's introduce our panel. Alanah, you're a primary trained teacher and former principal, and you're currently working at Children's Ground in Central Australia as the head of learning. Can you tell us what does learning look like in your context at the moment?
Yeah. What up, everyone? My name's Alanah Jack, and I'm a proud Gomeroi woman with ties to the Narrabri, Namoi River area in New South Wales. It's really great to see so many mob joining in from a Awabakal country. I'm born and raised in a Awabakal country, and just want to acknowledge that I am joining you guys today from Mbantua, beautiful Aranda country here in Alice Springs, and acknowledge elders past and present and my amazing team that aren't here at the moment with me, but are definitely here in spirit. So yeah, we're based here in Central Australia, in Alice Springs, and our early learning sessions are very different to a usual early learning session. So we're place-based. We don't have a site as such where we're located. So we're very transient in where we're located and moving around our sessions. So place-based in community or on country and First Nations led learning. So we have a really strong team of First Nations educators here, supported by Western educators as well. So we primarily, our sessions target our early years children, but we do also have a cohort of primary age children who come out on sessions with us, particularly on country. That's a part of learning that quite often schools don't have access to. So our kids love coming out on session with us, going out on country and having those rich learning opportunities. And this year we've been really lucky to start up our extended hours program as well. So we've also got learning that continues right through beyond usual school hours and into the evenings, weekends, and lifelong learning, which is really great. We're currently working in Central Australia across 5 communities, outstations or homelands. And our learning is really holistic and centered around what we call Ngarrngga. So Ngarrngga is as we know, First Nations worldview is very complex and it's really hard to articulate and visualize and put into words. So we're really lucky here that we have a key elder and really crucial part of Children's Grounds history, who's sadly passed now, Dr. M.K. Turner, who has articulated the Aranda worldview for us as Ngarrngga, and we have a really beautiful visual which represents Ngarrngga and all those key components of what an Aranda or First Nations worldview is. And while this worldview is primarily the Aranda worldview, it's really transferable to all First Nations groups we all have share a really similar system and worldview. So rather than me trying to articulate Ngarrngga, I'll just read out as it's articulated from our First Nations governance here. So Ngarrngga is our guiding framework for education and for life. From this, our learning system is derived. Our health system lives, our laws are created, our society is held, our responsibilities are established, and our cultures are sustained. Through this, we know where we belong, our identity, our connection, our history, and our future. So all of our learning here, and not just learning, but everything we do at Children's Ground is centred and comes from Ngarrngga. And it's really what is important for us as First Nations people, and it's front and centre in what we do rather than an add-on like other systems. So our sessions are delivered in first language wherever possible. So primarily most of our staff are first language speakers, with our Western educators introducing and really extending our children's concepts and learning in English and around literacy and numeracy. But we're really lucky with our approach as well, in that we're an integrated service. So while we're primarily early years and learning, we're very holistic in the Children's Ground approach. So we're lucky that we've got community development team and health and nutrition and research and resource development who all get to be a part of our session to give our kids and our communities the best of what we can provide for them.
Wow, thank you. Emma, you're working on a curriculum project called Ngarrngga. Can you tell us more about that project and the work that you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. Hi everyone, I'm Emma. I work for Ngarrngga. I'm currently in Naarm, so Wurundjeri Wurrung country. Ngarrngga is a Melbourne Uni project, and the word Ngarrngga is a Taungurung word meaning to know, to hear, to understand. Our goals are so for every student to learn about the history, cultures, and knowledge systems of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and for teachers to feel confident in showcasing Indigenous knowledge in their classrooms. So both of these things together lead to an education system that's culturally safe and a respectful space. I work in the curriculum team. So we create curriculum resources and teacher professional development in collaboration with Indigenous knowledge experts. Ngarrngga is a research project, so the resources we make are piloted in classrooms and they're refined based on teacher feedback. So the collaborative nature of the resources that we share means that educators can have confidence in their quality and their integrity, because I think often, I've also been a primary school teacher for a number of years, but I think as a teacher, we're wary of making mistakes and wanting resources that we know we can rely on and that are going to be really culturally safe and respectful. So in terms of when I talk about the collaborative nature of Ngarrngga, so we mean like collaboration with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So we make sure that the Indigenous knowledge we're showcasing is reliable and accurate and culturally appropriate, but also the collaboration with teachers in classrooms around the country. So we receive and enact their feedback to make sure that all the resources that we're putting out work in a classroom environment and are really effective in engaging students. I'm looking forward to sharing a bit more about the resources later on in the webinar, but at this stage we have resources for students in years 3 to 10 in a range of different subject areas, which we've had some new ones come out, which I feel really proud of and I'm really excited to share.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Emma. And Michael, you're the head of First Nations partnerships at Carey, Carey Baptist Grammar School. Can you tell us briefly about what your role looks like?
Sure. Hello everyone. I'm also in Naarm on Wurundjeri country, and my area of work stems a little bit from Ngarrngga country, which is up in the Gulf. For about 20 years, we've been heading up there in what originally was very experiential experience. Many schools have had opportunities to do an immersion experience with time on country. And we're a large independent school here in Melbourne with a huge number of students. And what we did a couple of years ago, and it was actually post the voice referendum, is that we had a little look at ourselves and decided that we wanted to put a little bit more effort in slowing down and understanding what we wanted to achieve in terms of being more culturally aware and being a help to understanding where we fit in the context of what it is to be Australian and so on and so on. So we had a unique opportunity to take some leadership in that space. And with the support of the Atamura Foundation, there are 22 schools that have developed partnerships with communities external to where their school is, city schools. And that opened up an opportunity for me to be seconded into this role for a few years to explore a deeper understanding of where we fit in the Carey context. And we've put a lot of work in that. And it's lovely to hear what Alanah and Emma are saying. We're in the really early days of completely understanding how that wisdom can infuse our curriculum. But the work we're doing is probably quite structural. We would like to make sure that we have a deep understanding of our local communities, our mobs around us, and the history. We've delved into Carey, where we sit and what country we sit on, who was here before we were here. So we're trying to get really deep in terms of understanding who we are and where we fit. And then we have some, as we branch out from Carey, Carey is like a lot of schools, has a lot of tentacles in all sorts of camps, programs on other country, and we're trying to strengthen our understanding of those countries rather than just be simply consumers of the country. We want to know the history of that country. We want to know what happened previously, and we want to be really respectful of that space. And we feel that that will deepen the experiential experience for our students. And then we also travel up to far north Queensland as a part of our program. And as I mentioned, we're also in the Northern Territory in the Gulf country, and now also in the Daly River area at Nauru. So we are definitely trying to deepen our connections and build partnerships with mob to strengthen both our respect of our First Nations people, but probably more importantly to support our kids. We talk a lot around mob kids walking in two worlds. We're really keen for, and I feel that a lot of the mob kids have had to do all the heavy lifting. We feel at Carey that our students need to start to learn to walk in two worlds. And we're really excited about that. And we have a great privilege to be in all of those different places.
Great, thank you. Emma, you have taught in early years as a primary school teacher, but you're also the mum of some young children. What examples would you like to share today about teaching themes of reconciliation and bringing First Nations perspectives to younger children?
I think that when supporting young children to develop an appreciation of the depth and importance of Indigenous knowledge and building their understanding of country and caring for country and all those important elements there, it's really important to connect new learning to their own lives and their own prior knowledge. And honestly, I think that's probably the case for all learners from early childhood to adults. It's important to make meaningful connections to new learning. Things that I've done working in prep classrooms and also with my own children who are 4 and 1, so quite little. And I've started by looking at seasonal calendars and making observations in the local environment, observations of water, sea and sky, all sorts of different parts of country. Looking at the seasonal calendars from the local area rather than, they're all different ones. There's lots readily available online as well. But encouraging them to apply that knowledge and learning to their local environment. I don't know, every little kid loves birthdays. Looking at when their birthday is and what season that is on the seasonal calendar in their area. I know my birthday's in November, and that's the grass flowering season where I'm from. And so having children know what to look out for and making observations in their environment is really important. Another tool that's hugely valuable is picture books in terms of being pedagogical tools that really help in introducing complex concepts of truth-telling in early learning environments. I think it's really important to choose books that highlight diverse and honest voices, that offer a truthful representation of culture, history, and identity. There are so many beautiful ones out there. I have a couple on my desk that I can share in a moment as well. But I think children become captivated by the stories and the illustrations in these books, and they often resonate with the developmental stage of young learners as well. Yeah, so I think this is a really age-appropriate foundation for exploring First Nations truth-telling and all those sorts of elements there within the early childhood and up into primary school context. Can I share some, Megan? Is that okay?
We'd love to hear about some of those
These are
books
my
on
own
your desk.
collection. They're on my desk always. But Sea Country book, oh, I can't really see very easily. But this is by Auntie Patsy Cameron and Lisa Kennedy, and it has beautiful illustrations and just talks about the seasons and the knowledge that comes from understanding those seasons and how that relates to the connection between the sea and the land. This one is a really common book in primary schools in Melbourne, and looking at introducing concepts of land and things. Can't really show, sorry, that's not helpful, but I'm happy to share titles in the chat as well. But I just think there are so many wonderful books out there that are a really great starting point for early childhood and primary school students. There's also some wonderful songs about country and about reconciliation that really resonate with young children as well. So that's where I'll begin.
Thanks so much, Emma. Alanah, you're an experienced primary teacher and principal. What are some examples that you've seen of truth-telling in classrooms?
Yeah, so I had to really think about this, and it took me back to really early in my career. I guess I've worked in a range of contexts, from mainstream public education, Catholic, independent, not-for-profit, the remote. I've worked around in different age groups as well. And I think back to quite early in my career, and I really, I guess straight as a First Nations educator, sort of realised the power that I held that I didn't really expect to hold as a First Nations educator, and that influence that I had on both my First Nations students and my non-First Nations students. And so, like, I think I was on my 10-week, what's it called? My 10-week prac anyway, and I had a student come up to me and say, Are you Aboriginal, Miss Jack? And I said, Yeah, I'm Aboriginal. And he said, Yes. And I said, like, why are you saying that? And he said, I've never had an Aboriginal teacher before. And he said, I just feel like I'm really going to connect with you so much more. And I guess he sort of saw what I didn't even realize was actually going to happen, that I naturally do really bond quite closely with our First Nations children. But it also made me realize with our non-First Nations children how much I could really create that love of our people, our language, and our culture by really embedding it in everything that we were doing. And so I know I had so many kids, and that my first class out of a uni, kindergarten in New South Wales, the 5 and 6 year olds transition up here. And I remember they used to always, like, their parents would come to me and say, they want to be Aboriginal now. They really want to be Aboriginal now. And that was just because of the love and passion I used to teach the kids with around that. But that was also where I guess there was the culture and the language and the immersion of that. But there was also coming around to, the truth-telling side of things around, Sorry Day and the past atrocities. And I think a lot of educators do shy away from that. And I can understand why. It can be quite confrontational, but it's so important. It is truly so important. And I think I realised straight away from our kids being 5 and 6 years old and teaching it in a way that was age appropriate with child-friendly language, and in a way that was really appropriate, that our kids really absorbed so much. And like Emma was saying, using picture books. So something like, even though it's more of an upper primary book, I still used it with kindergarten. It was what's it called? John Marsden's The Rabbit's Book. And it was quite a rich text, but still using that at a younger level to really approach our kids to understand some of the things that had gone on in the past. And I think instead of shying away from doing these things, it's really important to do it when our kids are young, so that they're not developing these prejudices that older kids are doing. Another really good one that I forget, someone sent it to me years ago. It's on a website, Auntie Annie's Childcare, and it's this really early years child friendly recount of Sorry Day. And I remember reading that to my my 4, 5, and 6-year-old class. And it really softly touches on those concepts of Sorry Day. And I remember then having my first parent-teacher interviews and having parents come up to me, and every single parent in my parent-teacher interviews was saying, like, thank you for teaching them about like culture and about Aboriginal people. And like they were coming home and saying, Mum, did you know that the pink people came and they took the brown people away? And it wasn't in a way that they were, you know, traumatized from that. It was more of, this is what's happened. It is a factual thing, and it is important that it is shared with kids in an age appropriate way. There was just an aspect of that. I still remember it really vividly. A 5-year-old in my class said to me, but Miss, like, why do we need to be sorry? We didn't do anything. And I remember, like, as a First Nations person, and I just like really stopped and I was like, how do I even explain this to a 5-year-old? And I was, in a way, I was hurt, which sounds silly, like to a 5-year-old. And then I really stopped and reflected about it and realized, like, it shouldn't have hurt me, but what it really did was such a strong, valuable teaching moment where I realized, until we really teach this and we teach it properly and we teach like why we're sorry and that it's not our kids' fault, and it doesn't mean it doesn't mean we've done anything directly, but it is important to acknowledge and really really work with kids so that they grow up who are adults who actually understand why. And yeah, are really educated, strong adults in knowing this stuff, which unfortunately in this day and age, even now, a lot of adults don't know these things. And I think I really broke it down for the kids, and I just said to them, like, when someone passes away or someone hurts their knee or something like that, and you just might say, oh, I'm so sorry, are you okay? Like, and you're acknowledging and you're empathizing and you're supporting. And, it doesn't mean that you've hurt that person's knee or that you had anything to do with that person passing away. It just means that you're showing them you love and you care about them. So there are ways to do it. And again, I know it's hard because people do tend to shy away from it, but there are ways to do it gently that still nurtures the child in a really trauma-informed, really supportive way. So, yeah.
Thanks, Alanah. Michael, as a high school teacher, can you give us some example of what truth-telling looks like in your context?
Sure, and thank you, Alanah, for that. That was beautiful. And Emma, I've got all those books on my desk as well. And just to reassure anyone in the group that's listening, we regularly use a lot of those books with our senior kids, and they're as meaningful and as powerful as stimulation for discussion as any novel, if you like. So, and our Year 9 students, as a part of the truth telling, spend a fair bit of time trying to deconstruct what it is to be who they are and where their values and where their view of the world comes from. So before we feel that we're comfortable to have our kids do any great depth into looking at First Nations wisdom and knowledge and understanding, we kind of spend a bit of time talking about what truth is, talking about what our truth is, talking about what made my students them. And in fact, they write a picture storybook about who they are, very similarly, using the examples that there are lots and lots of examples around who are you, where do you come from, what matters to you, who are your elders, etc., etc. And using that foundation of self-understanding and truth and your story, we use stories a lot in our course. That then gives the launching pad for the kids to start to go a little bit deeper into, the impact of colonization, explore racism from a position of strength and self-actualization rather than a defensive mindset, I think. So that's obviously that's a little bit different, but I think, Alanah, you were saying the same thing, that you want kids to feel comfortable in and knowledgeable in terms of their own background and who they are, so that they can. I love what you said about the idea of sorry being, if you've got a sore leg, you're sorry with a great deal of empathy, you're not the person that hurt the leg. So we talk a lot about celebrating the resistance and the strength and the survival. We talk about frontier wars and massacres, and we're putting a lot of effort into making sure that through all our curriculums, we have a First Nations lens, and that we're aware of the impact of our language. And that takes time. And as a school, I've been afforded the opportunity to kind of explore that space. For our older students, that's really important because they need a context, and they need to understand where they can stand in allyship and so on and so on. So from a truth-telling perspective, we try and go really quite deeply. And I think it stemmed from my experience first going up to Robinson River in Northern Territory, taking students in an immersive experience that was very experiential. And we found very quickly that the experiential nature of it was limited without the understanding. So we've put a lot of work into making sure that whenever we take kids on country, anyone's country, that we build understanding prior to going. And a good example is Carey's just started a program for our Year 10s up in far north Queensland. And a big part of that process is to really deeply understand where we're going, what happened previously, who was there before us, because otherwise we just stand on a beach that's incredibly beautiful, but without understanding the challenges. And many people will know the challenges in far north Queensland around Palm Island and so on. And we want our kids to be really, really informed as they enjoy the beautiful country they're in, who's looked after it for a long time. So I guess from my perspective, truth-telling with our students is to give them the tools to be safe in that truth-telling, and give them language of self-reflection, groundedness in who they are, because often it's quite confronting if you're not comfortable who you are, if you have to explore truth. And truth is complex for adolescents. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, so we spend a lot of time talking about those really deep philosophical understandings of who we are, so that we're open to understanding more from another culture.
Wow, I'm sensing from all three of your responses that this is not the type of thing that you do in 10 minutes at the end of a lesson, but that it's something that's really well thought through and introduced and nurtured throughout the process. That it's not something you just tack on to the end of a lesson, but it's something that you really embed into the broader curriculum. Thank you for sharing those stories. Emma, you've been working on lots of different resources to help teachers incorporate First Nations perspectives into the classroom. We'd love you to share some examples with us, please.
Yeah, so Ngarrngga have just released 5 new modules. So there are ones focused on country, so learning about country and place and understanding and reading and navigating through songlines, and they're both for years 3 and 4. Understanding smoking ceremonies is for years 3 and 4 as well. And then we have 2 sky modules. So they are Indigenous astronomy and the solar system, and Indigenous ecological knowledge and celestial objects. So that's looking at constellations and dark constellations and light constellations and Indigenous knowledge around that. And those 2 sky modules are around for years 5 and 6. So basically, the way that we have structured them, so we know that different schools have different pedagogical approaches and ways of planning ahead for each year or each term, and some things are kind of set in place and some things aren't. So we've designed the modules to maximise flexibility for educators while also ensuring that they provide information that's really accurate and respectful. And there are 4 different, I'll show a couple of examples in a minute, but there are 4 different resource types within these modules. There are whole units of learning that might take place over the course of a term. There's a pathway series, so teachers can choose which pathway to take depending on maybe the time that they have, their teaching priorities, or potentially the students' interests. There are resource collections that are designed to fit within a pre-existing unit of work, and there are also standalone activities. So there's all different types, and we're hoping that that means that they can fit in different education settings. I might get you to share the slide now, Angus, if that's okay. Is it shared? Oh, yes. So, let's see it just a sec. Is it up there, Megan? I can't see. Yeah, awesome. So, there in this the graphic on the left side of your screen that shows what's involved, what each of these modules include. The teacher support material. So obviously we begin with the Indigenous knowledge. That's what we build the unit of work around. And it includes all the different things in that graphic. The teacher support material is really important here in terms of building teacher confidence. So in the teacher support material, there's the context of the module, suggestions on how it can be implemented, how to engage with the Indigenous knowledge, and the case studies within the module. The case studies are sort of like examples of the Indigenous knowledge in practice. So examples from all around the country as well. And then there's also a list of supporting resources and a guidance and advice for implementing the activities within the module. So it's really supportive. The screenshot on the right-hand side of the slide there is just one page of the teacher support material. And I think it's something that teachers can refer back to if they're unsure, to make sure that they can have a deep understanding, they can answer the questions that students might have or that they might have themselves around the content there. On the next slide, which I still can't see it, that's okay, so I just wanted to show an example of how some of the resources can be used within pre-existing units of work. So these are case studies. Does it show all the Venus case studies there, Megan? Yeah, yes, thank you. And the case studies are from all around Australia. So what I might do as a teacher in years 5 and 6, we might already be doing a unit of work on the solar system. I might have my students researching different planets, and it's a really natural way to incorporate really important and interesting Indigenous knowledge around the planets there, and the stories and what that knowledge can be used for, and how it's going to be really scientific as well. So I might choose some of those resources to share with my students within that pre-existing unit of work. So that's something that can naturally be incorporated in what is already happening in the classroom. On the next slide, so I found it hard to choose which type of resources to show here. So I've kind of selected different ones. I think also I wanted to show them because as a teacher, I know that someone can talk to me about resources for a long time and I can still not really understand how that might look to my students or in my classroom. So I'm hoping that helps teachers, showing these resources now or examples of them helps teachers to think this I could use in my classroom in this way, or that one I might not use and I might make alterations here and there. So up on the top left, there's maths task cards. So these clearly link to the maths curriculum and incorporate knowledge around the celestial emu, which is a dark constellation. And there are lots of different ones that connect with all sorts of different areas of the maths curriculum there. We also, so I think in primary school particularly, when you're getting students to research, it can be tricky to make sure they're accessing really reliable sources. So if research is something that you are looking to do with your students, and we have lots of research cards there, just like the one down the bottom left side of the slide. And they give some examples. They provide links and discussion questions for students. There's usually a template to match as well for students to organise information that teachers can use or not use. It's really up to them. We have there's a night sky observation task that connects with one of our Indigenous astronomy units. That's like a take-home thing and encourages students and their families to take part in the learning as well. As well as the resources that I've shown up here. There is so much more. This is just such a tiny selection, but there are lots of discussion prompts and images and quotes that spark that discussion too. We use lots of exemplars for teachers so they can see what worked examples look like, and they can also, we consider what responses students might have to the different discussion questions, and we provide information around that as well. So lots of different resources. This is kind of just scratched the surface of it, but I'm hoping that you now have a little bit of an understanding. So can I quickly answer a question from Emma Roberts there in the chat? She's just said, do you have resources that connect to Western Australian Indigenous groups? The answer is yes. There are, within each of the modules, we have tried to do case studies from each different state most of the time. So a lot of the time there is, and you can use the search function on the website to find specific areas that you'd like more information on as well. And you're welcome to email Ngarrngga as well if you're looking for specific links. But yes, there absolutely are examples from there.
Thanks so much, Emma. Well, some really useful tools that are teacher-friendly and can help people get started sharing First Nations perspectives in their classrooms. Back to you, Alanah and Michael. If you were a new teacher who didn't really know where to start with these ideas of truth-telling, what advice would you give to teachers who are beginning their journey in this area? Would you like to go first, Michael?
Sure. I think I was thinking when I was going to answer this, I guess my first one is to develop a strength to be centered yourself and find your own safe space to enter in this space. It is really important that you do your own self-reflection and your own self-analysis before you kind of launch into it. And then another part is to be curious. One of the things I've learned certainly over the last kind of 18 months that I've been in this role is that it's actually not easy to make a mistake if it comes from the heart. If it's a genuine question and a genuine space of not knowing, my experience working with all sorts of different communities is that they're very open to that if it's coming from a space of learning. The other bit that I think I find really easy, especially working with seniors kids, is to maybe start with the Indigenous ways of learning as a starting point. So we put a lot of investment into teaching kids around the power of storytelling, kind of building links. And Emma, it looks like you've done that all through your curriculum beautifully in terms of building all those links, those learning links, and the learning maps, and to use varieties of language. Just the other day, we had a Year 7 full day program on storytelling. So we had musicians come in, we had artists come in, we had different mob come in and show different ways that we can represent learning. And we've actually found at Carey that that has sparked in a lot of our students that are disengaging from learning a re-engagement into learning for context, learning for understanding, learning for meaning, learning for a reason. And so the byproduct of getting involved in that space has been our students are re-engaging in learning because it has meaning, it has context, and it makes an indifferent way of thinking. And then I think my other one is that I love the idea of starting from country. So, maybe being outside a bit more. We're a big school, so sometimes I've got 700 kids in an assembly, and we do a bit of a visualization before the start of the assembly where I actually ask the kids to almost deconstruct the building that we're around, put their feet on the ground, take away the carpet, take away the concrete, take away the soil that was made by roses that weren't here before us, and go deeper into that soil metaphorically, so that they can be grounded a little bit more in what it was like, so that everything we're trying to do deeper, if that makes sense. So we're trying to avoid surface thinking, but we're really curious, and we build partnerships with all sorts of different groups. Everyone seems to be really interested in resources. One of the things I've learned over the last 18 months is there's no lack of resources. It's just how do you access them? How do you find them? How do you build them into your programs? That's the challenge. And how do you, I think, Emma, you mentioned, how do you verify the resource in terms of its quality and its truth? I think they're the challenges. There's so much out there to work in. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but gives you a starting point.
Thanks, Michael. And Alanah, what advice would you give to teachers in this space?
I guess I come from two spaces on this, both thinking back to early in my career, but also moving forward with thinking of where we're up to now in both the work we do at Children's Ground and where I guess I'm up to in my career, in that we need to really do things differently. And I actually want to speak to early career teachers, particularly in First Nations teachers, in that in the mainstream world, you will probably get knocked back down, and a lot will keep happening, unfortunately, in that world. But to keep standing back up and keep pushing for our kids and our culture and the future of our people and getting more First Nations knowledge embedded into schooling, not just the standalone, I guess, on NAIDOC, which is quite often what happens. So we know for our kids that they're quite commonly leave their language, culture, and identity at the gate. And I guess the biggest and most important thing is that I really challenge teachers and schools in general to think differently and to do things differently. So if we want different results, then we need to change things up. And that really comes back to changing our approach in that absolutely our Western educators incorporating this and truth telling in the classroom is really incredibly important, but things need to be done in consultation with community and with First Nations people, and particularly First Nations staff in the school, elders in the community, First Nations people in the community, because that's best practice. So my biggest recommendation is to get out and know your community, to invite community in, to have meetings with your families, to have meetings with and I mean First Nations families, because we know historically, coming from a truth-telling perspective, there are barriers for our families to engage in school, and that's because of everything that's happened in the past. So I believe every one of us as a teacher has a responsibility to help support and engage our families in our schools, because that's what will help our kids to engage in our schools. So inviting families into schools, having meetings, and I don't mean like sitting around a meeting room in a Western context, like have something outside under a tree, go out bush, go and sit out on country with families, go and visit families in different contexts, get to know families and get to know, I guess, our families will, if they don't have that knowledge, which varying across the country, people do have varied cultural knowledge and understanding and levels of trauma, but people know people, and even if there is that loss of cultural understanding and things like that, people still want that for their kids. So reaching out and getting people that have that that knowledge and that can support, I guess, you as a teacher and you and your staff to gather the right information, because again, contextually, every mob's very, very different. Like I was talking about up Ngarrngga now, and there's a worldview of things that overlap. We all have such varying stories and perspectives and ways of doing. So it's really important that things are, I guess, contextually appropriate for where you are. And there are going to be varying traumas and things that you need to be wary of, depending whether you're on the East Coast or you're central New South Wales, you're Central Australia, you're South Australia, Western Australia. Those things are going to definitely vary. And I guess, so that comes back into supporting our kids and, with the truth telling and cultural understanding. And I think that's why I was articulating before around working in those very contexts that I have. Things change no matter where in the country you are. But definitely the thing that does still sort of stay the same is that the cultural load on First Nations staff is quite heavy. And that is something that I do want to really acknowledge. And while it's great that I know in a lot of schools people will get our First Nations staff to help with these cultural things, but it's everyone's responsibility. And while I do encourage you to liaise with and consult and always have your First Nations staff involved in those things, because things, no one knows our people better than we do. But support our people in the schools when we're doing that stuff, because it's a big physical, emotional, and cultural load to be carrying that. And I don't know how many First Nations staff are jumping onto this, but I think every teacher I've come across as a First Nations teacher will say people will always come to you expecting you to do all that stuff, and we do still need support with that. And the only other thing I was going to say is just to make it accessible and support people when they are involved. When First Nations people are coming in and bringing those knowledges and bringing the truth telling and bringing that stuff to support, and also not always, I don't know how to put this in a different way, but a lot of people expect mob to give things for free and to give their time and their knowledge and their skills for free. And I don't mean it in a way of profiting off culture and things like that, but our time and our knowledge is still valuable, and we still need people to not just be wanting to take from us all the time, to still be seeing us as those key educators, those key knowledge keepers, and compensating for that as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Alanah. It's a really important point to not expect the world from First Nations people when so much is always expected of them, but we need to support them and do the work ourselves through consultation. Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, Megan, I did just think, sorry, the other thing resource-wise is we do have a really good bank of children's ground texts that are First Nation written, illustrated and led, and also joining up for Yuchurapampa, which is a First Nations education system, network of people. So if there are any First Nations staff here, we'd love to have you join our network.
Yeah, we might put a link to Yuchurapampa in the chat for First Nations teachers who are interested in joining that network. And we'd also love to link to the Children's Ground store with some First Nations text as well. We'd love to answer some of your questions now. A person has asked, have you ever had parents who are antagonistic to this message for their students? Has anyone encountered pushback from parents and carers? And how have you responded? Michael, would you like to speak to this question?
Sure. And going back to Alanah's point about that load as well, I saw that really powerfully leading up to the election. That was a really hard and unsafe space for a lot of mob, I think, and some of the discussions and dialogue around that I think is hard for us to understand, and I think at least acknowledging that journey is hopefully a really empathetic way to be. In terms of parents, well, certainly in my context, one of the things that's come out is our kids are kind of voting with their feet. So my subject in Year 9 is an elective, and we started it over 10 years ago. The subject started. We now have nearly 2/3 of our students choosing to do Indigenous studies. And I think part of the reason they're choosing it is because we're using First Nations wisdom, methodologies, pedagogies. We're slowing down, we're deconstructing things and then reconstructing. And I think kids are crying out for a different way of learning. And so we're hoping that speaks for itself. The other thing that I'm really passionate about is leading by our actions, not just our words. I think some schools and organisations can be seen to develop lots of symbols and raps and all sorts of things that they do, but then their actions don't match those words, if that makes sense. So I think my experience with parents is that if they get confused about our mixed messages, and we don't advocate really clearly for what we believe in, that's where the little chink in the armour is found. But certainly my experience at Carey is the more our kids have time in this space, the more parents are seeing new students and seeing advocate. We've got kids that are now brilliant allies for First Nations people at university, doing courses that link into this. And then I noticed just one of our beautiful parents has reminded me, as an example, we go up to Nauru, up at Daly River with our staff in terms of their learning. And Miriam Rose in that community kind of worked with us as staff on Diri Diri, like in terms of real listening and deep listening. And one of the things we learned is to be patient from mob up there. And so all of those little wisdoms that we see change in our kids, because our kids are struggling a little bit, and when they see promise in the way that we do things differently here, I think parents are on board well and truly. We have probably the one that I think that you're alluding to in terms of the truth telling. You have to set that context up right. So we've got brilliant history department, and our humanities department have worked very, very hard to get all of that that kind of curriculum area around truth telling really solid in terms of the research.
Great, thank you. We'll have time for a couple more questions. There have been a couple of questions about educational resources around treaty, and we'll look up some resources for you and share them in an email after the event. But the next question, maybe Emma, I'll throw this one to you. How would you gently tell a 3 to 5-year-old group about the stolen generation without causing concerns or anxiety?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one, absolutely. Firstly, I love the way that Alanah explained being sorry. That's really age appropriate for young children. And also, so just quickly linking back to the last question, which kind of relates, well, not as much, but it is linked to this one. In terms of like families not supporting what you're teaching in the classroom around truth telling, this like I've worked in government schools in different states for a number of years, and this has been something that's come up, and I think it doesn't solve the issue, and it's not like a simple solution, but I think linking it back to the curriculum is the best way to respond in that situation. As a teacher, that's what I would do, and or I would forward that the problem to a leader in my school, and as a leader in my school, this is what I would do. And I think so in the Australian curriculum, students start learning about Indigenous cultures, histories, and perspectives. Like in the Year 4 history curriculum, that it focuses on the impact of European colonisation on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It goes more into government policies and their effects on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Years 5 and 6, so including dispossession. I think if you're in the Victorian curriculum, it's quite similar. It doesn't explicitly talk about the stolen generation, but it includes effects of British colonisation in the Years 3 and 4 history, and looks at in civics and citizenship as well, like laws and policies affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And this includes early discussions about policies of protection and segregation that led to the stolen generation. So that's in Year 5 and 6. So I would kind of link it back to that. I think that's a kind of a safe option for teachers and for leaders to respond instead of trying to change their mind, just saying this is why we do it, because I know that's what I would do. I think in terms of gently telling years 3 and 5-year-old children, I think books, I don't know what else I would add on to that. Yeah, reinforcing that that's not something that they need to be worried about now, but then using stories to gain an understanding of that. There is another one, I'm sorry to do this, Megan. I sent it to you, but there's another one called Stolen Girl, another book, and that Megan will send around all these links, and that's a really good way to begin approaching these topics. I know that you've mentioned, the person who asked the question has mentioned that they already use some books, but that's another one that could be really useful.
Thanks, Emma. We'll just have time for one final question, which is how do you respectfully push back on directors or educational leaders to help bring more truth-telling both into early childhood facilities, but also schools more generally? Would anyone like to speak to that question?
Megan, I might think of a really broad, because my role's quite broad. I'm trying to develop a really broad First Nations strategy across the whole school. And I've only touched on some of the things we're doing. But I think if I was pushing back, I would be insisting that an organisation had a really broad strategy, well thought through, in partnership with all sorts of different First Nations groups. And there are a lot of support. There's a lot of support out there. One of the things I wanted to mention from that context is about the depth of the relationship with the First Nations people you're working with. We're really committed now to not having things that don't last, making sure that everything that we do is sustainable, every relationship is meaningful and respectful and reciprocal, and avoiding trying to do quick fixes, if that makes sense. I think that's the danger, is that, especially as Emma said, if a parent comes in and says, why are you teaching around the stolen generation? It didn't exist. That's like a snapshot in an overall curriculum that a student will be doing over a 6-year journey in secondary school. If you can put that learning in the context of the overall journey that student is taking. It takes away I think it takes away the ammunition that, you're just going to pick one piece out of a whole curriculum that doesn't sit comfortably with that parent. You say it's a part of a whole journey. Lots of my year 8 parents get upset that their kids aren't mature yet, and they assume that they're never going to be. And I just keep reminding them that they will grow up and they will be adults. And that's a long journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Thanks, Michael. It's good to remember we're talking about the bigger picture in the long term, not just the immediate concerns or issues that we're facing. Well, that brings us to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank everyone who has joined us on this call today, but a special thanks to our panelists for sharing your stories and experience with us. We would really love it here at Yellow for Children's Ground during National Reconciliation Week, and we'll be sharing a link in the chat. But for now, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks again for joining us. Cheers.